I remember when Cindy Lou Harrington was here a couple weeks ago, I said, my God, it's like you just give us this song, you just gift it to us. And that's what that was beautiful. That was much more than just singing a song. And I also wanted to say how lucky we are to have our band. Oh, yeah. We are so blessed to have Asha and our band. Thank you. Welcome. The Tao Te Ching teaches us in verse 33 that one who knows others is intelligent, one who knows himself is enlightened. That's what we've been talking about in recent weeks. We've been talking about our stories and our narratives, using them to find out more about who we are. We're on a search for knowing ourselves, for that is where enlightenment and peace and joy and fulfillment are found. Everything springs from a profound knowledge of who you are, who you came here to be, how you intend to show up. It's how we bring ourselves to the world, how we bring our service to the world. If we believe that we are here as spiritual beings having a human existence, that we are here in order to awaken, to look deeper, to find deeper, this is a road that we each have to travel, isn't it? We're so lucky here that we can travel it together. But at the end of the day, it's an inside job. We just have to do it ourselves. And our goal, as I've said earlier, our goal is not to spend endless hours, as they say, gazing at our own navels in a narcissistic way. Our goal is to develop the inner power, the inner knowledge, the inner focus that is our birthright, and use it to bring our gifts to the world. Use it to serve each other, to love each other, to awaken each other, to make the world a better place when we leave it than it was when we showed up. Isn't that the truth? That's our mission and vision. A global community centered in peace, love, and joy. Each of us as a messenger, as a point of light to help make that happen. This is a wonderful, a worthwhile, and a lifelong journey. You don't get it and get to sit down. We have to keep working at it. So we have spent several weeks exploring the stories we tell ourselves. I've enjoyed this series. It's about how we find the stories, how we find our narratives, what they mean to us, what our assumptions are. We've been encouraging each other to kind of unpack what it is we believe about each other, what it is we believe about ourselves. We've been exploring the power of story because we are a people who communicate by story. We always do. Whenever you ask anybody what happened that day, they don't give you a list of events. They jump into a story about what happened that day. That's the way we communicate. Last week, we talked about story on a more national level. We talked about the national discussion that our country is having about race, about differences, about diversity. And we talked about how we at One World are just jumping into that conversation. We want to be part of it because there is so much healing that needs to go on in that area, as shown by the recent spate of violence and shootings and misunderstanding and pain. We talked about that also at our HUG meeting. I think Jeannie Ward said that we were going to call them diversity dialogues. I like it. You got to have alliteration. So we like diversity dialogues. We can also call them oneness dialogues, because even though we're so diverse, at the end of the day, we're all one. We are all joined. In our centers, in our cores, we are all manifestations of the one. Even though we may look different, we may believe different, we may just appear in the world as different beings. At the end of the day, we believe that we are all one, that we are all connected. So, we are each of us, individually and collectively, on a journey of growth, of discovery, of learning, and also of unlearning. If we want to find information, we learn. If we want to find wisdom, we unlearn. I know you've heard that before. All the stuff we pack on ourselves, getting to wisdom is learning to unpack that, to see beyond it, to dig deep and find out who we are at our very core, to put aside, to put down what we may have learned that gets in our way. We all know the story of the Buddha and the man with the raft. Do we remember that famous parable? It's one of the most famous parables of the Buddha's teachings. A man is traveling along a path. He comes to a great river. As he stands on the shore, he realizes that there's dangers behind him. He needs to get to the other shore, which looks peaceful and inviting and welcoming. But he has no boat. He has no way to get over from here to there. So he looks around for a boat or a bridge, and there's not one. So he gathers twigs, he gathers branches, he weaves them together, and he makes a raft. And he paddles across, and he makes it to the other side. He makes it safely to the place that is welcoming and whole and safe. He can go on. But what does he do with his raft? Should he bring it with him or leave him behind? He asks. The Buddha tells him to leave it. The Buddha explained that the Dharma is like a raft. Wisdom is like a raft. It's useful for transitioning to get to where you're going, to get to the other side, and then you leave it behind. It makes no sense to carry it on your back. It's a burden. It weighs you down. The wisdom is to use it when you need it and then put it aside. So, do we want to keep carrying the rafts we no longer need? No, we needed them once, but we don't need them anymore. They are heavy. They are no longer useful. So, how do we put down those rafts? Well, that's what we've been talking about. The rafts are the stories that we no longer use, the narratives about ourselves and about each other that are no longer helpful. We put them down by doing what we've been talking about, by being consciously aware of the narratives that we hold close, by being aware of who we tell ourselves who we are, by looking at our givens, by looking at our assumptions. Don't you just have knee-jerk reactions in life, knee-jerk assumptions that you think are true, but if you kind of peek at them, you realize that they're not? Yeah, we've talked about a bunch of those. Mine was that I was an introvert. Remember I talked about that? Big lie, I'm not. I'm a big old extrovert. But until I looked at it, I didn't realize that. Because it's just something, because I got glasses at a young age. And as we all know, that turns you, if you're myopic, it turns you into an introvert. It's just the way it's scientific. Okay, that's not true. We find out what our stories are. We find out what our narratives are. The next thing we do is we tell them. We share them with each other. We've also talked about that a little bit. Author Rachel Freed writes that telling our stories is not an end in itself, but our attempt to release ourselves from them, to evolve and grow beyond them. We tell our stories to transform ourselves, to learn about our history and tell our experiences, to transcend them. To use our stories to make a difference in the world, to broaden our perspective, to see further than normal, to act beyond a story that may have imprisoned or enslaved us, to live more of our spiritual and our earthly potential. She gave a personal example. She told a story. I like this, so I'm going to share it with you. As a young Peace Corps volunteer, she and her husband lived in a beautiful house in Tunisia. They were there on Peace Corps duty. It was a beautiful house. Tunisia is a country in North Africa. She had many fond memories of the place. It had beautiful tile. It had inlaid walls. It had fountains. It had courtyards. It was a beautiful home. She remembered the parties at the house that she would give for other Peace Corps volunteers and for citizens with whom they made friends. Okay, so she returned home. She lived her life in the United States. Many years later, she returned to Tunisia, and she went back to the house because she wanted to see how it had changed. She wanted to make sure it was still there. She wanted to relive those beautiful memories. Do we see where this is going? She got back there, and it was an empty field. The place was strewn with garbage. There were a few walls here and there, but the house was gone. She was devastated. She writes that she wept because she had held these memories in her heart, and she wanted to relive them. She went back to the United States, and she told this story to a friend of hers. The friend listened, and when the friend had finished hearing the entire story, she said, "You know, that reminds me of the story of Holocaust survivors who, when they came back from World War II, when they came back from the camp, their lives were gone. Everything they had was just a memory. Nothing was left." And Rachel Freed, in listening to that, it totally changed her perspective on her story. It opened her up because it gave her the capacity to share the pain of those people who had lost so much. She hadn't really lost anything. Her memory was just that. The place was gone, but she had a house. She still had a family. She had everything she had before. But it opened her heart to understanding the pain and the real loss of others. And she achieved that through telling her story and through hearing about it from the friend to whom she told it. That is the power of sharing our stories and being heard. Author Joan Borisenko says, "We cannot wish old feelings away, nor do spiritual exercises for overcoming them, until we have woven a healing story that transforms our previous life experience and gives meaning to whatever pain we have endured." That's one of the key things about telling our stories, is we can look back at past events and we shape them into a story of healing that moves us forward, that closes holes in us, that answer questions for us. We can take what has happened to us and use it as a source of strength, resiliency, courage, and hope. In telling her story, Rachel Freed found a greater capacity to feel compassion, to feel love, to feel empathy. She also had the opportunity to be seen by another person, to be heard. That is something we all need, don't we? Sometimes I have talked to folks who go into nursing homes, who go into hospices, and the crying need there, I have found from people who, the wonderful folks who do that, is people just have a need to be heard. They want to talk about where they came from. They want to talk about who they are. And they're at a stage in their life when there aren't many folks left who know. I read once that one of the crying needs that a lot of elderly people have is just for someone to call them by their nickname. Because everybody who did is gone. That is the gift that we can give each other, to hear each other's stories. And that's what Rachel Freed got from her friend. There's also a power in telling our stories to each other, to another person. For those of you who are familiar with the 12-step programs with Alcoholics Anonymous, what is step 5? To admit your shortcomings to yourself, to God, and to another human being. Now, a lot of us might think, well, it's okay if I kind of admit it to God because he's not really there, and to myself, because then no one else needs to know. But no, the power comes from telling it to another human being. And why is that? Because you articulate it. You have the courage to share it. You, along with another human soul, you have the ability to examine it. You get feedback on it. It makes such a difference to just say it. Sometimes we hold things so close we think that they are huge, that they are terrible, that nobody will love us. But when you say them, don't we find out that's not true? Don't we find out that arms encircle you, support reaches out to you, that you remain as loved as you were to start with? So these boogeymen that you thought would just change everyone's perspective of you, everyone's perception of you, they are just the workings of our little monkey minds. That is the power of telling what is on your heart. Haven't you found that to be true? You got to work up the guts to just say it. If you know somebody who says they're working the steps and they haven't shared with another human being, maybe they haven't really worked the steps yet. Maya Angelou says, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Now, Maya Angelou was a storyteller, wonderful, rapturous stories, but it's true for all of us. We all have a story to tell. We all have many stories to tell. And part of our task here in community is to let each other tell them, to share them. Reverend Chris Kell had a great idea for a story group. Just getting together and telling each other our stories. He thought I forgot, I didn't forget. What fun would that be? Wouldn't that be a great idea? Sit down, have dinner, just tell each other our stories and listen and share. We need to know that another person has heard us, that we have been heard, and that we have been seen. I remember, I think I told you a story once, when I was, my very first class in seminary, the very first exercise we did was we were paired together, and what we had to do was go up to the person with whom we were paired and look at them and say, "I am here to be seen." And the person would look back at us and say, "And I see you." And I thought that would be easy. By the third person, I was a puddle on the floor, because I had spent my whole life trying not to be seen. And going up to a total stranger and saying, "I am here to be seen," I almost couldn't do it. They hadn't made enough Kleenex for me and for the other people in that room. Very powerful, because admitting that you are here to be seen, which we frankly all are, is a very heart-opening exercise. Healing also happens through telling our stories. And this is where we get to recast them. This is where we get to look back and take the events that we have been through, the things that have happened to us, and use them to weave a new story of healing and hope and recovery and triumph. I heard a story once about a woman who had been sexually abused as a child. And she had learned the script that she was a victim, that this had happened to her, and so in her mind she was a victim. It was her story. She told it over and over again. And then she grew to the point where now she was a survivor. And so that became her story. This had happened to her, and she was a survivor. She then met a therapist. She met a therapist who encouraged her to take it one step further, to totally shift her paradigm, change her story, so that it gave her power to move forward, so that it reflected the best elements of herself, her courage, her strength, her resiliency, her perseverance. And she did. So her story became that these events had happened to her so that she could learn that she was a woman of power, that she could triumph, that she could overcome, that she could take these events and use them to make the world a better place, because she had the power and the courage and the boldness to take that and not only triumph from that, triumph in numerous other areas of her life, because she was a woman of power. She would not have had that story. She would not have had the opportunity to reframe it if those events had not happened. Now, is that a terrible thing to happen to somebody? Of course it is. But it's also our opportunity to reframe it, to take the better parts of ourselves and turn it into stories of victory and courage and hope. Feel that energy for a minute. I am a victim versus I am a woman of power. Wow. Can you feel the difference? That's the power that comes from reframing our stories by reflecting the best that is in us. The essence of what animates and powers us at our soul level, which is joy, which is courage, which is strength. It's there in each of our hearts, just waiting to get tapped. She was able to put down the raft and keep going to a new journey of hope and courage. So, how do we create stories that empower us? How do we take the events of our lives and just take a fresh look at them? Shift them to reflect, as she did, the very best in herself. We can't change the facts. We know what happened, but we don't have to change the facts. What we do is we change how we look at them, how we experience them, how we interpret them, what they mean to us. We always have that chance. First thing we do is what that woman did. We say, what were the qualities I exhibited to get me through this? I exhibited courage. I exhibited resilience. I exhibited hope. I never gave up. I always knew that things would get better. You use those to reframe your story. The first thing we have to believe is that we deserve healing and renewal. That seems kind of easy, but there are a lot of folks out there who don't. I remember I was listening to a course taught by Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun who lives out in this Gampo Alley, but I don't know where it works. I don't know, Gampo Alley, but I don't know where it works. I think it's in Canada. Anyway, she was telling a story about the first time the Dalai Lama became aware of the self-rejection that so many Westerners have I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. She said he did not understand what people were talking about because it was such a foreign concept to him. The self-rejection, the self-hatred, which is second nature to so many of us, he could not understand it because it was just a concept that had never been introduced to him. It is a concept that we need to get past, and so many of us haven't. This may be an opportunity where you're learning way more about me than you want to, but I gotta think I'm not alone in this. We all have it. The first thing we do is we forgive ourselves. We are gentle with ourselves. We are not perfect. None of us are meant to be perfect. We're here on this human plane because we're not perfect. We are here to grow, to improve ourselves, to learn, to unpack. So the first thing we do is to be gentle with ourselves. How often do we relive past events? If you're like me, how often do we take what happened and we look at it, I could have done better, I should have done that differently, everyone's going to know I did that wrong, what a moron I am. Okay, show of hands. Hello? Yes, we all do that. That is the way we just are programmed to think. Okay, I'm going to give you some deeply spiritual advice right now. Stop it! Stop! Stop thinking like that. We move forward when we release blame, when we release judgment. We have to realize we did the best we could. We did the absolute best we could because we know our hearts are always in the right place. We know we are people of integrity. We did the best we could do at the time. We're so hard on ourselves. We are so much harder on ourselves than we are on other people. Why is that? If anyone knows the answer to that, I'm going to switch places with you right now. But we are, aren't we? We forgive other people for massive amounts of stuff that we would throw ourselves in the dungeon for forever, and I don't know why. We fear that other people will reject us. They will think less of us. They won't like us. They will shun us. At this point, I always think of that great quote, which I think came from Wayne Dyer, that what others think of me is none of my business. Don't you love that? I feel so much lighter even when I say it. What other people think of me is none of my business. Yes, sir. How liberating is that? It's also true. Next thing you want to do is just give yourself some credit. This goes along with releasing blame, releasing judgment, and not being hard on yourself. Give yourself some credit. We so often catalog the ways we fail. Our culture is so attuned to reminding us of the many ways that we fail. Do you ever make a list of the wonderful ways you make a difference? Who made a list lately of how great you are? I could ask for a show of hands and I bet I wouldn't get a 1. Do you ever make a list of the ways that you are a gift? That you have, God bless you, you are a gift, yes. I encourage you to do that. I'm not encouraging you to get a big head, but I don't think anyone in this room or who's listening to this is going to get a big head by doing that. It's not really a risk. It's just part of being aware, of being conscious, of being present, of knowing who you are and how you appear in this world. Try it for 2 to 3 days. Just make a list of the great, the giving, the loving, the wonderful things you do. It can even be a secret little list, so nobody knows you're making it. You might want to share it with others. Take a friend to lunch. Share your lists of what you have done to make the world a better place. How your light has just shone out and made a difference. Be seen and see someone else in a positive way. Give yourself some credit. Because I will guarantee you that the ways you make the world a better place vastly outnumber the little mistakes we make every day. We need to remember that. Take a fresh look at what you've been telling yourself about the events you judge so often. Take those filters off. Take those I'm not enough filters off. The I did it wrong filters off. The I'm going to fail again, I can't do that filters off. You're just defeating yourself. You're loading yourself up with so many rafts, you can't even approach the bank, much less get across it. Be aware of what you are telling yourself about who you are and how you appear in the world. Don't continue to jump on yourself with both feet. These are some steps to how you reframe your story, how you write a new story, how you write a positive, joyful story going forward. But there's also more. It's more than just reframing past events. Writing a new story is also asking yourself, how am I going to appear in the future? Who, as we say, did I come here to be? How am I going to sing my song for the world going forward? Rami Shapiro wrote, "Why do you exist? There is only one answer, to know that you are God manifest in your unique time and place." That's a big charge, but it's also true. Here at One World, we believe that is true. We are God manifest in my size 8 shoes right now, and so are you, each of us, a point of light to make a difference in the world. Jack Kornfield says, in many spiritual traditions, there is only one important question to answer, and that question is, who am I? When we begin to answer it, we're filled with images and ideals, the negative images of ourselves that we wish to change and perfect, and the positive images of some great spiritual potential. Yet the path is not so much about changing ourselves as it is about listening to the fundamentals of our being. So this is how we approach writing a new story as a practice. This is where our spiritual principles become so important. There is no substitute for meditation, for sitting in the silence, for listening to that voice that tells us how we want to show up, how we want to be in the world. I remember when Jeannie Ward gave her talk, she quoted Viktor Frankl, do you remember? Who said that between cause and effect, there is a pause. In that pause, we have a choice. We have a choice how to react. The more we maintain our spiritual principles, the more accessible will be our ability to make a positive, whole choice in that pause. The more second nature it will be to us to follow our own inner light in that pause. The more we maintain our spiritual practices of meditation, of prayer, of listening. There's no substitute for us. Others won't tell us how we're supposed to sing our song, how we're supposed to appear. Even people who give us wonderfully noble aspirations don't know what our heart is telling us, don't know how we are meant to appear. In his book, Journey to Daybreak, Henry Newman tells this story.